Hello everyone. So in continuation with our series on Syllabus Explained, we are back with another unit for public administration. This is Abhishiekh Saxena. So as part of our Syllabus Explained, today we are going to take up the unit of administrative thought for paper 1, that is administrative theory for public administration optional. Now I often say that the devil lies in detail, and when it comes to the UPSC mains examination, it is ultimately about the micromanagement of the topic at hand, because each question in the examination will focus or will emanate from a topic or a set of topics. Hence, it is advisable for every candidate to know the syllabus by heart, not just what UPSC gives us, but reading between the lines. So while the UPSC does give us a very detailed syllabus, but it hides more than it reveals. In that sense, it is pertinent for us to know the syllabus in micro details. And as part of our series, we are trying to do just that. So, administrative thought is one of the most critical units when it comes to the examination. Why is it critical? It is critical for the fact that many of the thinkers, the scholars, we find in this unit. It is not to suggest that we don't have scholars in other units, but the point here is that this forms the theoretical base for the scholars in public administration. I hope you all are aware that each optional will have its detailed, in-depth and vast theory part. And for that part, we have various scholars, men and women, who have contributed to a particular discipline. In that sense, if we see, the administrative thought is the unit which houses these scholars for us. Now, how this administrative thought actually emerged or emerges? While we deal with the administration and public administration, is it simply a layman's job? No. There is theory behind it on how and why you do certain things the way you do, and to bring about the efficiency and effectiveness in your public administration. A lot of these theorists are drawn from diverse backgrounds, sociology, management, right? But they nonetheless have made significant contribution to the field of public administration. So let's get into the details. So when it comes to the UPSC broadly gives us these heads. So this is the UPSC syllabus. Okay. It talks about the scientific management and scientific management movement, classical theory, Weber's bureaucracy and its critique, and the post-Weberian developments, dynamic administration, human relations school, functions of the executive, Simon's decision-making theory, and the participative management. Now pay attention. Each of these schools of thought, just like in every subject or while studying a discipline, we have various schools of thought. Some are traditional, some are modern, some are revolutionary, right? So in that sense, even the public administration as a discipline has got various schools of thoughts. And pay attention, you will find that against most of these thoughts, you have certain scholars which are named. Mary Parker Foley, C.I. Barnard, Elton Mayo and others. Okay, Rensis, Likert, Chris Argyris, Douglas McGregor. So while the UPSC syllabus gives us this much, there are certainly going to be more scholars. More scholars. And that UPSC does not specify. Hence, it is pertinent that we know the syllabus up to micro details, that at the bare minimum, what scholars do we need to cover and what studies do they entail. At the same time, let me give you a heads up that these scholars or these thinkers that you see largely overlap with the evolution of the discipline. They largely overlap. So while on one hand you will have the evolution of discipline, pay attention, we did it in the first syllabus detailing, the first syllabus explained that we did regarding the introduction unit. So anything will have a start and it will have a progression. Similar is the kind of the idea of these various schools of thought. They are largely given by UPSC in a schematic manner wherein one thing leads to other. But we can say that this section represents the tradition, this section represents the transition, and this section represents the modern manifestations. And of course, there are more. For example, here you have post-Weberian developments. So you will have certain scholars. Also, what is a larger blueprint that works? The larger blueprint entails the scholar and his theory. And of course, this theory will have certain postulates. It will entail certain concepts, models, frameworks. And while the theory will have concept, models and framework, it will have an ideological backbone, which we call as the phase. For example, scientific management and scientific management movement would have scholars like F.W. Taylor, Fayol, Gulik and Urwick, right? So the grasping of theme, the underlying theme, the ideological base is very important. Also, it will have the critique. Obviously, the later ones are going to criticize the earlier ones for most of the cases. In that case, because of the criticism or the weakness or the flaws in an existing concept will give rise to a new concept. And that is how a discipline evolves. That is why I said that you can basically superimpose these various schools of thought on the overall evolution of the discipline of public administration. And that will help you understand the topics, their concepts, the various models and the criticism better. So in that sense, we will have to look at each of the scholars. So let's dive into the micro details of the syllabus that we have. So first comes a preeminent scholar, Taylor, F.W. Taylor and scientific management. So when we talk about Taylor, it will be about how Taylorian ideas developed based on the science and how Taylor pointed out the deficiencies of the then prevailing management system and how he set the context for the scientific management. And once he set the context, then what are the cardinal principles which will form the skeletal frame for scientific management evolve? So we'll study those principles and how he develops a true science of work. That would entail scientific selection and progressive development of workmen, and marry the science of work and the workers. Then it will entail the concepts that Taylor developed while understanding scientific management, that is division of work and responsibility. What are the other important concerns of the scientific management and the critical analysis? Because Taylor was taking everything as science. It was devoid of human angle. So there is this hint that whatever flaws with Taylor were, they will set the ground for the theories succeeding Taylor. Right? So in this sense, if you see, the scientific management movement almost coincides with the coming up of the discipline of public administration, as we have seen in the syllabus explained of introduction. Now, the relevance obviously towards the end, whether the scientific management continues to be relevant now or not. Yes, it is a bit differently. Now, after scientific management as a school of thought would emerge the classical or the traditional school of thought, which will sort of take scientific management under its umbrella as well. There will be overlappings. And another scholar, that is Henry Fayol, in some books it is written Henri because he was a Frenchman, right? And his focus and comparison with Taylor, his focus on administrative training, the difference between the Taylorian approach to scientific management and the Fayol's approach, and of course his criticism and relevance. After Fayol, we have a duo of scholars, Gulik and Urwick. They adopt a structural approach. So just like you have various philosophical bearings, so somebody will be looking at a system from an outsider perspective. Somebody looking at it from an insider perspective. Somebody will be looking at it from the top management perspective. Somebody will be looking at it from the bottom of the management perspective. So, in that sense, a single reality can be viewed from various dimensions. And more often than not, these dimensions come into the question in the examination. So, Gulik and Urwick basically adopt a structural orientation to see, compare and to improve upon the workings of an organization, that is improving the administration. So in that sense, Gulik and Urwick comes up with their own set of principles. Gulik's 7 elements of organization, Urwick's principles of organization, and there they give a theory, a concept of departmentalization. In support of Gulik and Urwick, there are 2 more scholars. In support, I mean to support the idea, we will be using scholars like Mooney and Riley, right? And then the criticism of the classical approach as a school of thought, the relevance of it, and then certain classical ideas, the concepts, unity of command, span of control, unity of direction. These are all classical yet foundational concepts, and you will find them echoing in the discipline throughout, even today. So they provide meaning to the organizational analysis that we need to do as part of the subject. Let us say we are examining a government organization. So we'll have to see what is the order. The president is at the top, then the prime minister, council of ministers, then you have the departmental secretaries and so on. So it is based on a philosophy, a theory, a concept, that there should be a clear chain of hierarchy, chain of command. Who is superior? Who is subordinate? Now, after Taylor and Fayol and Gulik and Urwick, Mooney and Riley, we come to Weber, one of the most significant scholars for public administration. In fact, the entire civil service that you see around is theoretically called as a Weberian bureaucracy. So it is this concept of bureaucracy that Weber works upon that gives a renewed meaning to public administration and help the scholars and practitioners understand the administration. His main thrust is on the concept of authority. And in that sense, the interplay between the bureaucracy as a concept and the authority as a concept is at the crux of the Weberian analysis. That is why you see on authority, then he comes up with some forms of authority, traditional authority, legal rational authority, etc. The concept of bureaucracy, the features of legal rational bureaucracy. See, from authority to bureaucracy it has combined. What are the features of officials? What are the elements? So these form the concepts, the building blocks of the Weberian theory. These. Then he talks about another set of concepts, collegiality, separation of power. We see separation of power between executive, legislature, judicial. It will have some theoretical basis. Similarly, other concepts like direct administration, amateur administration, representation, and the criticism of the Weberian theory and the present relevance. Along with, after we study a lot many theories, we reach a point, then we study the post-Weberianism as an idea. That something that is Weber's contribution is such that it is Weberian and post-Weberian. It acts like a dividing line. So much is the significance. After Weber, of course, there is Mary Parker Fayol, MP Fayol, a lady, who is known for dynamic administration. So there are various schools, the classical and the behavioral, which we will study. So classical does not have the human angle, whereas behavioral focuses on the human angle. And Fayol acts like a bridge. So in Fayol's theory, you will find that there are some classical ideas, right? But Fayol goes beyond a mechanistic aspect, okay, workmen, method, tools and techniques. She goes for more meta orientation when it comes to human behavior in organizations. Jealousy, affinity, like, dislike for work. Things like when two people have a conflict on a particular issue or how a task to be done. So conflict resolution is at the center of Fayol's analysis. So to that end, Fayol works on certain concepts like constructive conflict. Similarly, power, authority. So authority we dealt with Weber as well. So that is where we will link. Control, the overall contribution of Fayol. And then comes the behaviorals, another school which says classical was good but not good enough. It was devoid of human orientation. And there comes Chester Barnard, who's famous for his organizational analysis, organizational behavior. Some of you in management, if you have studied management, would have studied Barnard. So he works on organization, the tangible, intangible, the formal, informal aspects of an organization. Again, his views on authority, concepts like communication, responsibility, decision making, and is known for his key work regarding functions of the executive. And of course, Barnard's criticism and overall nutshell encapsulation of Barnard's contribution to public administration. After this behavioral school, when it started, right, in the interim between the classical and the behavioral is the human relations school. And human relations school was marked by Elton Mayo, a scholar who conducted various experiments. You see, first inquiry, early experiment, Hawthorne studies, one of most significant contribution, right? And the issues that he touches upon, absenteeism in the industry, problem of rest and introduction of rest period, the human relations schools, and to that end he will develop principles of human relations school, and we will compare this human relations school with the classical, the various approaches he followed and the overall evaluation of the human relations school, how far it went, where it fell short. So the scientific management, classical, human relations school, behavioral, that is going to be the flow of the ideas that we have. So in detail, when we study behavioralism, we will study behavioralism as a theme. And to that theme, we will study the reasons why it grew, right? What are the differences between human relations and the behavioral school, and the criticism and relevance of the behavioralism as an idea. Of course, we'll be using concepts, principles which are part of the behavioralism as well as their criticism. Then certain core scholars like Chris Argyris and his theory on human personality and how to reduce the tensions in the organization. What will be the future kind of organizations? So here he is looking at various issues within the organization. Here the maturity, immaturity model, limitations of maturity. So he is giving models. So a model always gives you an ideal. It also explains how things work. Just like you might have a model of an engine to see that, okay, there is a fuel, there is a spark, and then there is the ignition, and after the ignition the energy is released and the engine starts. So that's a model to understand. A model of a house or a building will help you understand, okay, what it is going to look like. So similarly, Chris Argyris is giving certain models and concepts. So these approaches need to be taken in cognizance, and of course the critical evaluation of Argyris. Critical evaluation of Argyris. Continuing with Argyris, there comes Douglas McGregor, who gives us certain theories. For example, theory X and theory Y. Similarly, Rensis Likert gives us typology of organizational management system. Here is the typology. A linking pin model, how in an organization the things are linked to one another. How the effort flows from one direction towards the top or towards the attainment of the goal. What kind of management systems should be there? So if you see here, I have mapped those management systems, type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4. And ultimately, the evaluation of the Likert's approach, what was good, where he fell short. So after McGregor and Likert, we will largely be done with the scholars that we have as a base. Of course, there are going to be more scholars. scholars are going to be there when we talk about the criticism of these very schools of thought. But let us look at how this unit fares in the examination. I've told you before that the entire paper is of 400 marks, out of which you have to do 250 marks. So in that sense, if you see, administrative thought has a sizable weightage of roughly about 50 marks. So that is around 12.5% of 400. And hence this makes administrative thought as one of the key units to be prepared for the mains examination. It is very easy. Thinkers, their concepts, their criticism, new school of thought. So once we start understanding these things in a systematic manner, it is going to be very easy for us till we understand the theme. Now, I have plotted for you the frequency wherein we see participative management, functions of the executive getting frequently asked. So these topics, if you see, and the numbers in the bracket, these areas represents the sizable chunk which gets asked in the syllabus. And largely, if you will see, this is the distribution. In question number 1, that is the compulsory question, you have a lot many questions. At times a couple of questions, more than 1, 2 questions, right? In question number 2 again, which are 20 markers and 15 markers, okay? So it is here that you will see, rarely you will see in part B, question number 5 onwards. Largely it is confined to part A of the paper 1. Alright. So when we look at the administrative thought, we need not get intimidated. Rather, we should understand that if a systematic study is to be done, because this is a major portion, it takes one of the longest times. If I plot it on the entire spectrum of public administration, just like it takes around 12.5% of the marks, it takes around 25% of the time to complete this particular area when we are studying public administration for the civil services examination. Now, what are the sources for it? If you will see the sources are broadly few. The IGNOU material, there is a book Prasad and Prasad, and of course Mohit Bhattacharya, which we referred for unit 1 as well. You will find certain scholars being mentioned and used here as well. Now the key in this part is linking and interlinking these various scholars, that one school will have a certain limitation and this will give rise to another school. And if we understand the limitations, we will understand how the next school gets built on it. And there we embed the thinkers. So this is the theme which is running: the scientific management movement, classical theory, human relations theory, behavioral school, participative school, so on and so forth. And through this we can build a holistic understanding of these scholars. Very easy, right? So with this, we have come to the end of this session, but there are going to be more sessions demystifying the syllabus for public administration for each of the units that have been mentioned by the UPSC. That's all. Thank you.